Britain's secret war in Libya evolved in fits and starts, but its architects believe it helped finally to tip the balance in favour of the Libyan revolutionaries, enabling them to seize the country and catch Colonel Gaddafi.
Colonel Gaddafi said he would hunt you down like rats, but you showed the courage of lions, and we salute your courage.
That success, we have learned, did involve deploying the SAS on the ground to help. But the tale of how they got there wasn't simple. The Libyan revolution started in February last year. Very quickly, the Libyan armed forces split, and the leading rebels set themselves up in Benghazi. The British government soon decided to send a rescue mission to the desert of southern Libya. It involved RAF Hercules aircraft and a couple of dozen Marines from C Squadron of the Special Boat Service. Ministry of Defence footage showed the mission, but not the commandos who were there to secure it. On the 27th of February, they mounted 3 flights to take 150 grateful foreign oil workers, 20 of them British, from Zilla in southern Libya to Valletta in Malta.
When we got onto the plane, there was 2 locals attacked the plane with large knives or machetes to try and rip the tyres. And the special forces challenged them, told them to stop. And fortunately, somebody tackled them, brought these guys down and took them back.
In the footage of the taxiing Hercules in Malta, a clue appeared to the next phase of the operation. A Special Forces Chinook helicopter awaiting its mission. For in the chaos engulfing Libya, the government decided to back the National Transitional Council, or NTC, and work for the overthrow of Gaddafi.
Mr. Speaker, it is clear this is an illegitimate regime that has lost the consent of its people, and our message to Colonel Gaddafi is simple: go now.
The next phase of the operation involved a highly sensitive unit of British Special Forces, made up jointly of the SAS and SBS. It's called E Squadron and operates closely with MI6. Early in March, 6 members of E Squadron boarded a Chinook helicopter with 2 MI6 officers and flew to a place near Benghazi. They were going to meet rebel leaders. Why do it that way when there was a British frigate sitting in a harbour nearby? Apparently MI6 wanted to avoid going near any symbol of British power. But the mission turned into a fiasco, reported worldwide.
A British diplomatic team detained by rebels in Libya has been released.
Revolutionary forces.
Despite carrying everything needed for a covert mission, from civilian clothes to a variety of passports, the British had been nabbed by armed local farmers. E Squadron had come unstuck almost immediately, and the British ambassador was left to plead with the NTC to release them.
I hope to ask Mr. Jalil if he might be able to intervene to help us clear up this misunderstanding, if there's anything we can do to help explain who they are and what they were doing.
After this public embarrassment, British Special Forces were closed out of the picture for months, we've been told. But the visible commitment of planes and ships was growing. A couple of weeks later, France, the US and Britain started bombing Gaddafi's forces, and the stakes were raised again for the Cameron government. It was time to send a properly accredited team to Benghazi to liaise with the NTC. By April, half a dozen army officers in plain clothes and intelligence people were actively working in Benghazi to build capacity, an embryo defence ministry and a command structure. They operated in Benghazi, Misrata and near Brega, but they were unarmed, and their main role was to get some Libyan units working to some sort of plan while saving them from being hit by accident by NATO. That happened a couple of times, and we filmed these NTC units marking their vehicles with identification symbols as a response. The poor record of these men, though, led British liaison officers in Benghazi to argue for people able to raise their performance. The UN resolution that authorised NATO bombing specifically prohibited ground troops anywhere in Libya. But what about advisors or special forces? We've learned that the National Security Council, shortly after the bombing started, tasked military chiefs to look at the feasibility of a train and equip mission to the Libyan rebels. Publicly, meanwhile, ministers shied away from talk of boots on the ground.
This is not British ground combat forces going in, and that's what the people mean by boots on the ground. We're very clear about the United Nations resolutions. They forbid any occupation, foreign occupation of any part of Libya, and we will absolutely stick to that.
The road to sending British special forces back into Libya lay via Qatar. The Emirate had taken a strong stance against Gaddafi from the outset. Visits from British and French military chiefs led to a joint mission being established. Special forces from all three countries would be sent to Libya to assist with training as well as coordinating their command and NATO airstrikes. The French would go to the west, the British to the east. And by August, around 20 men from D Squadron of 22 SAS were operating in small teams at places like Brega and Misrata, as well as a training base in southern Libya. The airstrikes had gone on for months, and many had predicted that doing it from the skies alone might not work.
It's become a much more difficult fight, much more difficult targets. As I've observed in recent days, essentially it is very much stalemate-like in the vicinity of Ajabi and Brega.
Within days of the new teams moving into action, the NTC was fighting its way into Tripoli. Assistance from Qatar and France seems to have been particularly important here, but the Misrata units that were being helped by the British were soon forcing their way into Gaddafi's hometown of Sirte. Even at this point, the British would not give weapons, but it did help the Libyans with radios and other equipment to coordinate airstrikes. France and Qatar did send weapons, including, we've been told, Milan anti-tank missiles like these. As the revolutionaries fought into Sirte, NATO airstrikes were pivotal, and they were coordinated by the British, including men on the ground. Were they involved in the final drama as Muammar al-Gaddafi was taken and then killed by the NTC? That's a subject that everyone remains tight-lipped about, though they do say that within weeks of Gaddafi's death, the Special Forces' presence was being wound down. The architects of the joint UK-French-Qatar operation insist that it gave coherence, organisation and drive to the revolutionary ground forces.
Integrating the Qataris, Emiratis and Jordanians in the operation was also vital. Without them and their defence chiefs' leadership, especially the huge understanding they brought to the campaign, it's unlikely that the NTC's militias could have successfully acted as the land element, without which the right outcome would have been impossible.
The role of Special Forces and MI6 in this process is still not publicly acknowledged, but it was important all the same, and it extended the degree of British involvement in the Libyan revolution to a far greater extent than public statements by the government had suggested.